This is chapter 13. It's the last chapter in the book. It's the ugliest chapter in the book. So we're going to talk about why people hate each other, and hopefully we'll come up with some answers. Just to show you, I know you all know what prejudice is, but uh, one of the things we're going to look at is another group that suffers from prejudice in another country. So you can see what it looks like in another country. Well, let's get started. There we go. Chapter 13. Prejudice is a negative prejudgment of a group and its individual members. Some prejudgments can be positive, but those tend not to be troublesome and rarely lead to untoward treatment. Prejudice is an attitude, feelings, behaviors, and beliefs. Prejudices are maintained through stereotypes. Stereotypes are beliefs about the personal attributes of a group of people based on overgeneralizations and inaccuracies and resistant to new information. So let's talk about the pariah of India. You may have heard the word pariah, and where does it come from? It comes from this group of individuals. The untouchables or Dalit or pariah were the outcasts or the people beyond the caste system. Their jobs or habits involved polluting activities like cleaning up human waste or cleaning up dead bodies or burning dead bodies, as I just said in another class. Now this is a dating. I'm going to show you a dating site from India. This is the dating site from India, and what we're going to look at is a caste system. And as you can see, there is no Dalit here. Why isn't there a Dalit? Because if people were a Dalit, then they wouldn't admit that they were a member of that caste system. The highest caste is the Brahmins. Yeah, there you go. And these are the castes that exist in India. But and it's kind of curious because there are some colleges that have a number of Indian, Asian Indian students, and they have rejected the concept of caste. So you cannot demonstrate your caste on that campus. And there are some of the languages spoken in India. There are the 5, 6, 7 major religions: Hindu, Sikh, Baha'i, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, and Jain. And occupation. There you go. All the states. NRI. I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure what that is. What college you went to. Those are the colleges. So as you can see, those are all the castes that are in India. As weird as that seems. Oh, okay, wait a minute. So these are the untouchables, the Dalit, the pariah. Prejudice is a negative attitude toward a group or its members. Discrimination is a negative behavior toward a group or its members. While discrimination often has its source in prejudicial attitudes, this does not have to be the case. Institutional discrimination may exist where prejudices have dictated treatment, but present attitudes do not support the treatment. And of course, this is one of the problems we have in the United States. African Americans have run into institutional discrimination, as the American Indian population has as well. Any job that involved ending a life, such as fishing, killing or disposing of dead cattle, or working with their hides, this is what the pariah did. And of course, anybody else wouldn't touch a dead body. They wouldn't have anything to do with killing anything. Only the untouchables would do that. And this, of course, is the burning of is a cremation of an individual. And of course, these two guys. Whoops, I'm sorry. These two individuals. I don't have my. These two individuals here are both untouchables. There's probably other untouchables in this group, but these are obviously untouchables, or pariah, or Dalit. I have a friend from Bangladesh, and of course, they don't have a caste system in Bangladesh, but he knows Hindi, and he has friends who are from India, and they live by this. If you are a lower caste than someone else, then they won't have anything to do with you. It's relatively strict, and you can only date within a certain caste. And if you date down, then then you don't have to marry the person. So, it gets ugly. It gets really ugly. Two institutional practices that supports discriminatory practices are racism and sexism. Racism represents both an individual's prejudicial and discriminatory behavior toward people of a given race and institutional practices that subordinate people of a given race. Sexism represents both an individual's prejudicial and discriminatory behavior toward people of a given sex and institutional practices that subordinate people of a given sex. Any contact with human emissions such as sweat, urine, or feces, that's what the pariah or the Dalit or untouchables do in India. This included occupational groups such as sweepers and washermen, people who ate meat. Hindus in India are vegetarians. This category included most of the primitive Indian hill tribes, and those were the ones that they were showing prejudice against. Most of the women working as prostitutes in India are either pariah from India or women from the surrounding areas of India, such as Nepal and Bhutan. Most were sold into prostitution by their families because their families were starving to death and they needed one less mouth to feed and they needed some money. So that's why they sold them into prostitution. If we look at these three women, actually we can only see the foreheads of these two. But this individual is wearing that's a good luck symbol, and I can't remember the word for it, which marks her as a Hindu. But she doesn't have one. But she does have a nose, something on her, around her nose. Racial prejudice is prejudice against people of a specific race or ethnicity. Racial prejudice has led to some fairly horrendous genocides throughout the world. Racial separation was one of the hallmarks of the United States that persisted well into the 1970s. With a history of 400 years of racial separation, it is unrealistic to assume that old wounds will heal automatically. Between the Civil War and civil rights, this is what was going on in the South. White women, colored men, white. I don't understand. I think these are restrooms showing you where you could go to the bathroom. This is a drinking fountain for colored people or for African Americans, and the other one, which is inside a cooler, is for white people. Help wanted, white only, no pets, colored waiting room, and colored admission 10 cents. This is for a movie theater. In 1998, 7,489 hate crime incidents occurred in the United States. A 1997 Gallup poll showed that half of African Americans had experienced some form of prejudice within the previous 30 days. In the same time frame, 10% of whites showed outward disdain for blacks. Of the three most numerous minorities in the United States, blacks tend to suffer the most severe racial discrimination. And here's the FBI statistics on hate crimes. Hate crime incidents. Okay. racial bias. 66.1% were motivated by anti-black bias. 22.4% stemmed from anti-white bias. 4.1% resulted from anti-Asian Pacific Islander bias. 4.1% were a result of bias against groups of individuals consisting of more than one race. And 3.3% were motivated by anti-American Indian and Alaskan Native bias, based on Table 1. See if we can find Table 1. American Indian and Alaska Native, there were 101 incidents, 109 offenses, there were 115 victims, and 92 known offenders. Religion: anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic, anti-Protestant. Anti-Jewish was way above everybody else. Anti-Islamic, 130. Anti-Jewish, 674. Anti-Catholic, 70. Anti-Protestant, 33. Yeah. Anti-atheism and agnostic, 12. Huh. Interesting. There are 6,121 hate crimes reported in 2016. After the Trump election, there were over 1,000 hate crimes a month in the first 6 months of 2017. 2017 hate crime statistics. Uh, 7,106 single bias incidents involving 8,493 victims. And the other statistics. Hate crimes in 2020. And as you can see, they went down. Anyway, okay. While blatant racial prejudice seems to be declining, it seems that it is being replaced by an automatic emotional reaction. Individuals low in prejudice consciously try to suppress prejudicial thoughts and feelings. Individuals high in prejudice merely maintain their prejudiced thoughts and feelings. People may maintain a dual attitude system where they consciously control their prejudicial thoughts but may maintain automatic habitual dislikes from childhood. While racial attitudes are based on xenophobia and otherness, gender prejudice is based on gender stereotypes that tend to be based on cultural understanding. Since everyone is related to at least one female, gender prejudice tends to be less exclusionary than racism. However, it still exists and has assumed women into a subordinate role even to modern times. And here's an old advertisement for legs. Legs were pantyhose. Is it always illegal to kill a woman because she can't work the Pitney Bowes postage meter? This is a computer. You bet your sweet telex operator it is. And of course, that's fairly sexist. You mean a woman can open it? That's a Del Monte ketchup bottle. Keep her where she belongs. I'm not exactly sure where they think she belongs, but evidently it's on the floor, laying down, I guess. If your husband even finds out you're not store testing for fresher coffee, Chasen Sanborn. which they don't make anymore. It's a type of coffee. Show her it's a man's world. Van Heusen, Man's World Ties. There she is, serving him breakfast in bed while he's got on his shirt and tie on her knees. How very weird. Wives, look at this ad over carefully. Circle the items you want for Christmas. Show it to your husband if he does not go to the store immediately. Cry a little, not a lot, just a little. He'll go, he'll go. Husbands, look this over carefully. Pick out what your wife wants. Go buy it before she starts to cry. Fairly insulting. Sooner or later, your wife will drive home one of the best reasons for owning a Volkswagen, and that is that she can't drive very well. Blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. I'm not sure why she would. I guess cigar smoke makes women follow you, according to that anyway. One of the insidious aspects of gender prejudice is that females tend to maintain strong female stereotypes just as readily as men do. Attitudes toward women have changed as rapidly about women as the attitudes dealing with racial discrimination. However, most women do not feel discriminated against. That is something that happens to someone else. But of course, we are talking about the United States and democratic Western countries. Around the world, we find that 2/3 of the world's unschooled children are girls. In Saudi Arabia, women are still forbidden to drive. I think they still are. I'm pretty sure they are. The Taliban in Afghanistan would not allow women to go to school and have money. They flogged, terrorized, and left them physically and mentally ill. It is estimated that 76 million females have been lost in China and India through selective abortions and infanticide since population control has been enacted. Women in Saudi Arabia, they have to cover up completely. If they go to a restaurant, they don't want men to watch them. Men are not allowed to watch them, so they have curtains. And of course, this is an old idea. Unequal status breeds prejudice. From time immemorial, masters have rationalized slavery by viewing their slaves as lazy, irresponsible, and lacking ambition. Though it is the economic inequalities that create the social inequality, those in power justify their wealth and power by stereotyping those without as lacking the drive for success. People tend to respect the competence of those high in status and like those who agreeably accept a lower status. Religion and prejudice. Studies in the 1990s found that church members express more racial prejudice than non-members. Those professing traditional or fundamentalist Christian beliefs express more prejudice than those professing less traditional beliefs. In 1982, a study found that faithful church attenders were less prejudiced than occasional attenders. The clergy were the most likely to oppose Hitler and were the most likely to support the civil rights movement. Gordon Allport sees the victims of racial discrimination reacting in two basic ways. Those that blame themselves tend to withdraw, participate in self-hate, aggress against one's own group. Those that blame external causes tend to fight back, maintain a suspicious attitude, and increase group pride. When faced with a situation that might be prejudicial, the individual being discriminated against may react to the possibility by performing badly and losing their confidence. This is referred to as stereotype threat. Stereotype threat has been demonstrated in experiments, a form of self-fulfilling prophecy. Humans are gregarious. We like and need to live in groups. Our sense of self is not only a personal identity, but a social identity as well. Social identity is the group we identify with. Any description of ourselves can be a social identity in that we see ourselves as similar to those who have those traits. Without anyone to compare ourselves to, we wouldn't have an identity. John Turner and Henry Tajfel see people categorizing themselves, identifying ourselves with in-groups, and comparing ourselves with out-groups. In-group bias, the mere process of identifying yourself, sets up the categorization process of creating groups of who we are, us, and who we are not, them. It is a natural reaction to maintain an in-group bias, the tendency to favor one's own group over any competing group. Studies have shown that people from individualistic cultures maintain more in-group bias than those from collectivistic cultures. Because of our social identification, we conform to our own group norms, sacrificing ourselves for our team, family, and nation. We dislike outgroups. The stronger we feel toward our in-group, the more prejudicially we react to threats from another group. When our group has been successful, we can also make ourselves feel better by identifying more strongly with it. In-group bias is the favoring of one's own group. This may lead to the liking for the in-group, the dislike for the out-group, liking for the in-group and disliking the out-group. Out-group stereotypes prosper when people feel strong in-group identity and when we are with our in-group members. The bias created is as from social comparison. The better your group is, the worse an out-group seems. And an example of this would be when you're in high school and you played your rival team or the rival school, and how horrible they were, every damn single one of them. There's something wrong with those people. They're different. They're not right. They always cheat. Okay. That's what we're talking about, in-group and out-group. Once established, prejudice is maintained largely by inertia. When the society accepts the prejudice, most people will follow the path of least resistance and conform to the idea. They will act not so much out of a need to hate as out of a need to be liked and accepted by their own group. Studies in the American and African South from the 1950s demonstrated that the more socially conforming an individual was, the more prejudiced they were. Social institutions, schools, government, the media will bolster prejudice through segregation, a social norm of separating racial or ethnic groups. Schools will reinforce dominant cultural attitudes through the images in their school texts to the attitudes reflected in their primary readers. Fun with Dick and Jane. This is the book that I read when I was a kid. And there we go. Dick has brown hair, Jane has blonde hair, and so does Sally. And of course, Tim is Sally's bear. And then Puff is the cat, and Spot is the dog. Why? Because they're easy to read, that's why. There they are. Jane and Dick and Sally, and Mom and Dad, and Spot, and Puff, and I can't remember. Tim. Yeah, it's Tim. See it go. Look, said Dick. See it go. See it go up. Jane said, oh, look. See it go. See it go up. Up, up, said Sally. Go up, up, up. I can remember reading this. It always seems silly. Who talks like that? The answer is Dick, Jane, and Sally do. And of course, Spot was right there watching the plane go up, up, up. And of course, all policemen are good. They brought Sally back. Advertising will perpetuate ideas and concepts merely with the focus of their pictures. Faceism is the showing of men's faces and women's bodies in advertising. Men's faces, women's bodies. Men's faces, women's bodies. What do potato chips have to do with Katy Perry? Oh, okay. They were wondering if she'd had breast implants. There's nothing fake about pop chips. Men's faces, women's bodies. Oh, that's kind of painful. Frustration integration, the scapegoat theory. Researchers looking at the economic situations in the South between the Civil War and Great Depression discovered that lynchings were more likely to take place when cotton prices were low and frustrations were high. When unemployment is low, societies accept more diversity and pass more anti-discrimination laws. During times of social upheaval, minority populations become readily available scapegoats to blame for a population's frustration. The defeated South targeted their former slaves. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the minority they chose to target were Jewish people. This may occur because when one group is frustrated, any success of the minority group is seen as adding to the frustration. And this is pictures. He's supposed to be Jewish. And she's supposed to be a good German girl. Look at that. He's got his hand on her butt. There's Judah. See, they're all very stereotyped. It's the long nose is supposed to be Jewish. If you noticed, his nose was pretty big. There you go, another big-nosed person. And so now this is the Germans they're asking who's behind the Allies, and the answer was Der Jude. The realistic group conflict theory purports that prejudice arises from competition between groups for scarce resources. In the United States, the strongest anti-black prejudice occurs among the people closest to blacks on the socioeconomic ladder. In Canada, opposition to immigration fluctuates with the unemployment rate. To perceive ourselves as having status, we need people below us. When our status does not allow us to feel superior, prejudice does. Study after study has shown that when an individual has low self-esteem or has their self-esteem attacked, they're more likely to express polarized opinions that are more likely to reflect prejudice toward a select group. Research directly after World War II demonstrated that people who maintained prejudices against one group were more likely to maintain prejudices about other minorities. Ethnocentric people are people who believe in the superiority of one's own ethnic and cultural group and a corresponding disdain for all other groups. Ethnocentrics tend to share authoritarian tendencies. Ku Klux Klan. Actually, these are two black guys dressed up like the Ku Klux Klan. You can see from their hands that they're probably black. But that is the Ku Klux Klan burning a cross. Those with authoritarian personalities tended to be intolerant of weakness, believe in punitive outcomes, be strangely submissive to in-group authority, be harshly disciplined as children, predisposed to focus on power and status, maintain an inflexible right-wrong way of thinking. Research seems to show that while the whole spectrum of political belief can show prejudice, right-wing authoritarians tend to be equal opportunity bigots. The same can be said of people who categorize people according to hierarchies of merit or goodness. Because of their staunch criteria, their social structure tends to be highly polarized. Humans try to simplify a complex world by dealing with it in stereotypes. We stereotype everything from cars to fast food restaurants to computers. You may like McDonald's and hate Burger King. You may like apples and hate PCs, or vice versa. Your favorite car may be a Buick or a Chevrolet or a Ford. Ford people and Chevy people argue a lot. Without this form of categorization, we would be unable to make decisions, or we would tend to make the same mistake over and over again. And we do it with cars. This is one of the things I did in my class. Which car would you take? Would you take this one? this one, or this one. Which vehicle would you take? Would you take the SUV? Would you take the sports car? Or would you take the pickup truck? We find it especially easy and efficient to rely, and it's really kind of interesting because when I was on the reservation up in Montana, guess which vehicle was the most popular? Was it the SUV, the sports car, or the pickup truck? And the answer, of course, is the pickup truck. When I was teaching in Clinton, Iowa, at Ashford University, and I asked them the same question, I got that one. They wanted the SUV. Now, personally, that's my car right there. I don't have one just like it, but I've got a Miata. Back end's a little shorter. And it probably goes faster than this one anyway. We find it especially easy and efficient to rely on stereotypes when pressed for time, preoccupied, tired, emotionally aroused, too young to appreciate diversity. Because of our social stature, Americans tend to automatically categorize people by race, ethnicity, and gender. It is common when seeing objects in a group to see them as more uniform than they really are. When this is done with people, it may create outgroup homogeneity effect. Perception of an outgroup is more similar to one another than one's own in-group. Individuals recognize their own group as diverse, but outgroups as more alike. When people feel bad, they tend to perceive people and events in more negative light. People tend to see differences in the faces of their own racial group that tend to lump people from other groups together as looking alike. This is known as own race bias. This may be because the categorization process is delayed when looking at the face of someone from another race. The individual tends to focus on the racial difference. And there we go. Now, you may think all Koreans look alike, and the answer is, you're right. This is all the same face. So that's not a real picture. When people are surrounded by people of another race or who look different, they tend to stand out as distinctive. We tend to focus on differences rather than similarities. Distinctiveness allows us to categorize individuals. Because difference is focused on, the individual good and bad aspects of the individual are exaggerated. Now, the interesting thing in this picture is we have one person with a trench coat, and we have one female. But the reality is, even the rest of them aren't the same. This is a white guy. The rest of them seem to be African American. Hard to say. I'm guessing he's African American too. As we are talking about stereotypes and prejudice, it must be remembered that people vary in stigma consciousness. They may hold stereotypes, but they may not assume that very many people will fit into their stereotype. Excuse me. The reverse of this is that people who see themselves as the victim of a prejudice will tend to see themselves as frequent victims. It is normal for people to assume that when they do something that is negative, it is externally, situationally induced. However, when they see someone else doing something negative, very frequently they will assume that the act is caused by an inner disposition. This is known as the fundamental attribution error. Sometimes people from an outgroup will do something that is as ethical or more ethical than one's own group. Frequently, people will overlook this behavior as aberrant behavior for that group. This is known as group-serving bias. At the same time, an individual might excuse the same behavior in their own group. And this is a parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan, Samaritans, you have to understand who Samaritans are. Samaritans were a rejected people in Israel. And the reason they were rejected is because they had a different religious structure than Judaism. Their structure was more like a patchwork of religions between the Catholic religion, I'm sorry, the Jewish religion and the Islamic religion. So they were hated. They were hated by the Jewish people, mainly because they weren't Jewish. So one day this man was robbed and left naked and bleeding on the side of the road. When this Jewish person came and saw that, despite the fact he was Jewish, that he was naked, he decided that he would not help. Why? Because if as a Levite, if he touched this man, he would become contaminated. This is another Jewish person. When he passed the individual, he did exactly the same thing. He just went on walking. This is a Samaritan. Now, Samaritans are hated by Jewish people. Yet, the Samaritan, despite the fact that this man was obviously Jewish, stopped and helped. Not only did he stop and help, but he took him to the next town. And there's the next town right there. He took him to the next town and he checked him into an inn and he said, if he needs anything, then just charge it to me. And I will catch you on the way back around the next time I come here. And that's the parable of the Good Samaritan. The two Jewish people wouldn't help, but the Samaritan did. Now, does it mean that all Samaritans are bad except that one guy? Well, no, that's not what they meant. What they meant was, here's an out-group person that is helping an in-group person, and the in-group people will just ignore his plea for help. But the out-group person will help him. Many people see the world as a just place and people getting just what they deserve. Therefore, a person wouldn't have an accident unless they were drunk or driving incorrectly. This is known as a just world phenomenon. People get what they deserve and deserve what they get. People who maintain staunch stereotypes seem to be able to maintain them despite the evidence to the contrary. Often they do this by subtyping the stereotype. Subtyping is accommodating individuals who deviate from one stereotype by splitting off a subgroup stereotype. Middle class, blacks, feminist women. Some people will take one experience and generalize it into a group stereotype. This is known as an illusory correlation, the false impression that two variables correlate. The media will sometimes create illusory correlation between accentuating differences more readily than similarities. While the media may be seeking sensationalism, in the less astute, they may be creating illusory correlations between about a population. And that is the end of the chapter. So, had a good time this year, this summer. If you take another class, I'll see you then.